possible: the longboat. These revolutionary ships took Viking explorers further west than any Europeans had ever gone before. Closer to the Viking homelands, they were a weapon, the bringer of death and destruction. Jonathan Foyle is in Norway at the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. He's come to see the Oseberg ship, discovered beneath a burial mound in 1903. It's 1,100 years old and is over 90% intact. Crucially for archaeologists, it's the oldest surviving Viking ship with a mast. By adding a mast and sail to what were originally just rowing boats, the Vikings doubled their average speed from about 5 nautical miles per hour to more than 10. They also opened up the possibility of long sea voyages. To find out precisely how the mast was constructed, Jonathan meets Bjørte Orseth in the museum workshop. Bjørte is one of Norway's leading specialists in Viking wood carving. He's been trying to understand the technology of the mast and why it was so revolutionary.
What's that? Is that a bit of structure over there?
Yes, there you have the mastfisk.
Mastfisk?
Yes.
Oh, the mast for the sails?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a model of one?
Yes, that's a model 1, scale 1 to 4.
And what, that comes in the top?
Yes. And down, and then you have this one, also look.
I see, so you slot that in. That's not going anywhere, is it?
No.
The mastfish, so called because of its shape, held the mast in place. Its purpose was to help distribute wind thrust evenly along the length of the ship. This would prevent the mast from snapping in high winds. Because it was easily removable, it also allowed longships to go under low bridges and other obstacles that would block ships with fixed masts. But piloting these ships required immense skill. At the Oseberg ship, Knut Pasha, a leading longship expert, explains.
Where would the level of the water be on the side of the boat here?
Yeah, you can see that's about where you have 19 degrees in angle there. That area, that's it. So if you tip over more than 9 degrees actually, then you will sink at once.
It's a very fine, delicate balancing act, this boat.
Even after 1,100 years, the shipbuilder's skill is still visible.
It's extremely well preserved, as you can see, and this iron doesn't rust.
So these are the original rivets?
Yeah, it is.
These rivets were made from naturally occurring bog iron that doesn't rust. But clearly, the most important material was the wood of the ship's hull.
Well, it's made of oak, 100% oak.
How many oak trees would you need for a ship this size?
A good guess could be 80, at least 80.
80 trees?
Yeah.
These are major investments, aren't they?
Yeah, they must have been expensive.
And how many in a fleet?
We do have written sources that tells us about 50 and even 100 ships at the same time.
So 80 trees times 100, you're talking 8,000 trees. This is deforestation.
Using oaks that could take up to 150 years to grow, Viking ships changed the appearance of the local landscape and the face of seafaring forever.
There's an essence of Vikingness in the ships. That's where you imagine Vikings being on the high seas. But when you come face to face with a 1,000-year-old Viking ship, you get a real respect for their industry and cunning and sheer determination.
The skill and determination of the Viking shipbuilders is readily apparent in Denmark at the Roskilde Museum. Elena has come here to find out how the revolutionary design of the longships changed the Viking world. She's with Ture Muller, a shipwright who builds using authentic Viking techniques and technologies.
So are the tools you're using then pretty similar to the ones they would have used in the Viking Age?
We try to get as close as possible. We can see it from those excavated parts. Sometimes we can't find all the tools that we can see marks of on the ship.
The systems of measurement that they use, do we know what they used in the Viking Age? To measure,
no, we don't know. There are pretty many theories, but in traditional boat building, you do it over and over again.
Yeah, so they use certain standards then?
Yeah.
So how long does it take to build a boat like this longship here that you've been working on?
It took 4.5 years, something like that, for 5 men. But they would probably prefer to build it with much more men.
Oh, so a bigger team.
Yeah.
Each vessel was a major deployment of men and resources. Inside the museum are several Viking ships discovered in the 1960s in the local fjord. They allow us to see more of the design that defined the Viking world. Together with Anton Englert, curator of the museum, Helena examines a cross-section of Viking-age ships. The culmination of this building tradition was the longship. Decades of experimentation and experience have produced a near-perfect form.
So this was a true Viking longship used to enforce the law.
Yeah, a large Scandinavian man of war. Yeah.
All Viking ships, including the man of war, share key characteristics. First, the keel and crossbeams were attached to the stem and stern posts. Strengthening ribs supported a deck at the center of which sat the mastfish. The planks of the ship, called strakes, overlapped vertically. They were held together with rivets. Only 12 feet wide, this ship was 100 feet long. The final phase added the shield hooks, oars, rudder, mast, rigging, and sail. The man of war carried 70 to 80 Vikings, 60 of which rowed at any one time. Its shallow draft meant that it could go almost anywhere.
This vessel had a draft not more than 3 foot or 1 meter. And this would make it possible to sail up any river in Europe.
So these were incredibly sort of flexible vessels in the sense that you could cross an ocean in them, you could go up and down a coast, and you could actually sail quite far inland.
Yeah, you could call them amphibious vessels.
This flexibility was the key to their success. It enabled them to strike far upriver from the coast. Helena wants to find out what life was like aboard a Viking longship. Anton shows her around one of the replicas in the boatyard.
Can't help noticing that she doesn't seem to be built for comfort.
There's very little space and no private sphere here for the 60, 70 or 80 people who could have been on board.
What about food and drink, provisions? Where would you actually keep your food?
As you can see, there's very little space down in the boat. Most of it is filled by ballast. So if you wanted to carry sufficient amount of weaponry, you could only carry very little food and water. Within 2 weeks, you would run out.
So every couple of weeks, you'd have to make sure you'd be able to land and replenish your supplies?
Yeah.
Despite the lack of space, these ships were ideal for exploration. And Viking leaders like Eric the Red and Leif Erikson harnessed their power to travel immense distances. The range, speed, and maneuverability of the longships gave the Viking crews a clear edge over their enemies. And by the 9th century, the Vikings were changing from raiders to invaders. In 866, Ivar the Boneless led his army to England, where his bloodlust and cruelty became legendary. Our investigators have explored the Viking town of Berka, which thrived on the trade routes of the Baltic. And they've seen how the unique design of the Viking longship gave them an edge over the rest of Europe. Now, Jonathan Foyle is in the British Isles, where the raiders became invaders and settlers. This dramatic shift would influence the Viking way of life across all of Europe.